Hey everyone, so in this video I wanted to take an in-depth look at what you can use a form for. So there are several types of database objects such as tables which store the actual data within a database. There are queries which let you search for records and search for data within those tables, and some of the queries even let you modify that data. There are reports which let you view the data. Forms are another type of database object, and what they do is they let you interact with those other objects. So, in short, the form, it creates a streamlined user interface. It creates a streamlined UI. Because a lot of those things I just described, those objects, they're not very user-friendly to look at them, and you definitely don't want your end users designing them and looking at them at a very technical level. You want to create, whenever possible, a layer on top of them that basically hides them away. They don't see the table. They don't see the query. They might see the report. That's really geared for end users, but those other objects really aren't. They really should be hidden away. Other than the database manager themselves, your end users really shouldn't see those. Those should really be invisible. So, you can, if you've ever looked at a table in its datasheet form, it basically looks like a spreadsheet, and spreadsheets are not great for data entry. They're great for data storage, but not for data entry. So creating a form that gives a streamlined experience, a structured experience, maybe there are certain fields that have consistent values. Maybe there are fields that can be auto-populated. Well, the form can help you do those things. And so it streamlines the user experience. So rather than have them enter what is essentially a spreadsheet, they can use this form. And the form can also do things like data validation. So there's lots of real benefits to using forms for data entry. They can also be used to set the criteria for a query. So again, a query, it's not user-friendly when you look at it, so you can hide the query, and you have a form that basically they simply have some drop-down boxes or text fields that they type into, and then they get the results. Now, you might have the results display like a table in datasheet view, or you could have it appear in a report, which brings us to the next point. You can use a query to control a report. And lastly, in this, we're going to look at how you can use a form to navigate other forms. In other words, you're creating a menu. So you have like a main menu. So if you have 3 or 4 or 10 different options, you have a menu that first lets people know what those options are. They click on a button, and then it brings them to the form that then does one of those aforementioned tasks. Okay, so enough with the PowerPoint. Let's move on to the actual lesson. And here we are in Access. The only thing I did offline is I did take a few minutes to create a table. There's nothing special about it. Let's just click into it. Just product name, which is a short text field, buy price and sell price, which are currency fields. Primary supplier and secondary supplier are also text fields. No point in seeing me create a table because the table you're using is going to be different anyways. So we'll just close that. So I said the first thing that you can use forms for is data entry. So we're going to do some data entry into this table, and we're going to create the form and then do the data entry. So we click on the Create tab, blank form, and we're going to want to get rid of these navigation bars. And the reason for that is because, again, part of the reason what you're trying to do with a form is you're trying to control the user experience. You don't want them to navigate in an unexpected way. So on the Design tab, we're going to go to View, Design View, back to the Design tab. Going to click on Properties Sheet, and right now it's the properties of the form as a whole. That's what this little dot here means. Once we have controls in the form, we can then look at the properties of the individual controls. But for now, we're looking at the properties of the form itself. So a few things. We want this form to be able to create new records. So let's go to Data. And it has data entry no. So we're going to change that to yes. We want it to be able to create new records. Also on data for record source, we want it to be that table that we just looked at. We are now also going to change, as I mentioned, the navigation bars. So for format, record selectors, no. Navigation buttons, no. So let's go back to view. You can see those are now gone. We'll go back to design view. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to be able to add new records to that table. So what we do is now we go to add existing fields. These are the fields that correspond to this table. So product name, buy price, sell price, just like I said a few minutes ago. So what we can do is we can put product name, and you can just grab that upper left corner to move these independently. If you grab an edge, they move at the same time. Buy price, sell price. And yes, the layout of this isn't great. That in itself takes time as far as what kind of layout makes sense. This is fairly wasteful because you got all this space to the left and right. Usually you want to try to limit the amount of space that the user has to navigate through. But again, like I said, the layout is a separate, that in itself is really a separate tutorial as far as what makes sense. And what we'll do, what I did is I left clicked, drag, and that lets you select the control. Now I'm just using the arrows. Now that we move that one up, we can move these up. Okay, now what we're going to do, you can actually move the edges by pointing, clicking, you can move the edge. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a command button. That's this right here. And that's just an advisory. And for the moment, I think we're going to pass on this because let's just pass on this. We can just do close form with a class module. Class module is attached to an individual object, whereas a standard module can be used by any object. So again, let's take a look at this. So product name, buy price, sell price, primary supplier, secondary supplier. So this really isn't an inventory sheet. This is like adding a new class of item to your database. So maybe you do closeout retail. Some company just went bankrupt or whatever, and this is what you're going to take in from them. Or again, maybe it's just a new product that you're carrying, whatever. The bottom line is that this clearly isn't refreshing, updating a pre-existing record. This is adding a new record. So this is a new type of product that you're going to carry. So what are we going to do? Let's go back to design. We've got the command button here. What we can do is once you've entered the record, we can either close the form or we can have the form be refreshed. So let's close the form for now. Now this is just the caption, doesn't actually functionally do anything. But with that selected, we can click on the property sheet. And so like I said, you're now looking at the properties of the button, not the form as a whole. So that's the form as a whole. That's the button. Event. On click. So when you click on the button, we want something to happen. So we're going to click on the ellipsis. We're going to choose Code Builder. And this is going to be a class module because it's going to be attached to just this one object. And we're just going to type docmd dot close. That's it. That's going to close the form. And close that. Although you don't have to, you can just navigate back to this. And let's now do this. So We'll save this. Go to View. Product name will be, and again, I don't want to overemphasize this too much, but so often I'll do a tutorial for a database and then someone says, hey, I want to track item X, not item Y. It's the same thing. The actual structure of your database, it really doesn't change that much, whether you're tracking toy cars or DVDs or books or laptops. It really doesn't matter what you're tracking. The functionality is the same. So to try to hammer that home, I'm just going to call this item 1 because it doesn't matter. The database doesn't care what you're putting here as long as it's the right data type. Buy price, we'll say 5. Sell price, it's 10. Primary supplier, we'll just say Claire R. And the second supplier will be Leon K. And then we close. Let's go to our table. There you go. You now have a row in there. You now have a record in there. One more time. Go to Form. We'll say this is item 2. Now for data entry, spaces are just fine. Having spaces in data is not an issue. Having spaces in the name of structural objects, that's the problem. Buy price, 10. But the sell price is only 11, so it's a much lower margin, both as a percent and as an absolute amount. And this one is by Chris R. And secondary supplier is just Barry. Close, go back to our table, and there you go. So that's how you would do data entry using a form rather than manually typing and tabbing along in here. Now, because this is a very simple, since it's a very simple table, might seem a little bit like overkill, but as I said, you can do other things as well, like you can do data validation. And you can do other things, like say you're tracking the name of who has created this entry. So let's do that. Let's go to our table, and we'll go to Design, and we'll add entry underscore author. Who entered this, or entry user, whatever. So who created this entry, and it's short text. Wants it to be saved. We can put into the form what we'll do is we'll create a drop-down box. Click on that, left click, drag this over. And what we can do with this is we can either have this link out to a separate table or embed into this the name of the users. Now, in an ideal situation, you wouldn't really want a user to select their own name, but you can just derive it on a login. But for the purposes of showing you what a form can do, we will use this example. So I will type the values that I want. Next, let's just widen this a bit. So who are the users? Well, we've got Samara. We've got Sadako. We've got Jason. Got Michael. You got Freddie. Next. And what we're going to do is we want this to get stored somewhere. So we're going to put it here. So we store that value in a field, and we can put it right there into the entry user. So again, if you're looking at high security, you really don't want people to manually select because they could select the wrong name. They could select someone else. So it creates a data entry issue. But again, this is really for demonstrative purposes only to really show how this kind of functionality works and how you can streamline some of this. So rather than having to type in a name, they can just select it. So next, finish. Let's grab that corner, put it here. So now watch what happens. We go to View. Actually, let's save the form. Product name. So let's call this item 3. This costs 20. Sell price of 60. Primary supply, Albert. Secondary supplier, Moira, because this Albert fellow, he might not be trustworthy. Now watch what happens. So who created this record? Let's say it was Sadako. We close it, we go to our table, and there you go. So again, that's an example of what the form can do for you, is that you can streamline and simplify data entry rather than having them to type out their name. And that's just a first name. You might use first, middle initial, and last name. So again, might seem a little bit overkill for this situation, but that really demonstrates one of the powers of a form, is that you can, is if you have a field that has pre-existing values, you can have people just select it from it. So again, this example, not the best example, because from a security point of view, you don't really want people typing their own names, but maybe there's some other field such as that. Maybe it's new, used, or maybe the condition or whatever. Okay, so that is the first example of what you can use a form for. We said it was for data entry. So the next example will be to use a form to run a query. So that means we will now create a query. And a brief splice there while I did some data entry because I didn't want to waste your time. We already did a few examples. No need to go through it again. So what we're going to do now, we're going to make a query, as I said, and so the extra data entry was just to give us some similar results for the query to find. So just like the form, you come up here to create, you go to query design, and we can either drag table 1 from here or from here. Actually, here you double click, not drag. Sorry, here you can drag. Just expand it out to make sure we're looking at all the fields. Now, obviously, this is not user-friendly at all. So that's what I mean. You really want to hide this away from your end users because this is not a great thing to look at. So you can grab all these at once. You can also use the asterisk, but that could have some unintended consequences. There's some good ones and there's some not so good ones. So I'm just going to manually select all these and then just drag them down. And it looks like it created a couple extra spaces. Those would probably disappear on their own, but we'll just highlight them and then delete them. So now what you do is you can put criteria in here. So like, for instance, say we wanted to see all the ones that were created by Sadako. Did I use an upper or a lowercase? Let's go back to our table. Used uppercase. Okay. And then you just run the query. So on the design button, here's run. And it says we have 3 that were created by Sadako, item 3, 6, and 7. We'll go to our table, item 3, 6, and 7. So the query is working. But that's a static value. What I mentioned is that you can use a form to configure the query. So rather than having a static, rather than having a constant here in the criteria, you can point to a value on a form. Well, we need to create the form first. So, create blank form. Again, we'll go to View, Design View. We're going to shut off the navigation buttons. So again, the form as a whole is selected. We click on Format. We do Record Selector, no. We do Navigation buttons, no. And what we're going to do here, we are going to, we'll just put a single control just so you can see how you can do the interaction. Say we want to do the example that I just used where we're searching by whoever created the record. Maybe that's the actual salesperson who negotiated the contract. So what we're going to do, that's another example where you don't want people manually entering values. So we're going to do just like we did for the other form. Just put in a drop-down box, and we'll use those same values. Now, here's the thing. This is an example where having a table would be better than manually entering the values, because now I have to enter all those values a second time, and I have to make sure that I don't make any typos. So if you find that you're going to use the values over and over again, makes more sense to use a table. Maybe we'll do that by the end of this video. But we'll use the same process. I will type in the values I want. And so now we have to make sure we use all the same ones. Also, the nice thing about a table, if you make a change to the table, these will automatically update. Whereas here, I would have to manually come in and change every single one of these. So we had Freddie. The order doesn't matter, though, in this case. And I believe that was all the names. Okay, so what we're going to do, just to make this easier on us, we're going to click on this drop-down box, and rather than using this oddball combo 0 name that it gave it, we're going to go to all, and here's the name. We're going to call this, let's see, sales rep. Now what we do, so first let's make sure this is running. Yes, we got the names there. So what we're going to do, we're going to go to the query, and we're going to have the query point to this. So let's save our form. We'll just keep it as form 2. We come to our query, and down here, we get rid of Sadako. We right-click, we choose Build, and now we're going to navigate to that form. So Database, Forms, Loaded Form, Form 2, and there we go, Sales Rep. That's what I just created. So what we're saying, we can do OK, the criteria is going to be whatever value is selected from this drop-down, this control, on this object, which is a form. So let's go ahead and save the query. Now what we need to do, we need the form to actually run the query. So we're not quite there yet. The form makes a selection, but it's not actually executing the query. So a couple ways to do this. You can, just like other objects, there is an event. So what we can do is maybe choose, rather than on click, we could do on change. So you've changed the value, okay? So on change, you could automatically run the query. That would be kind of simple. But the problem is if someone chooses the wrong name, then suddenly, they meant to click on the one underneath it. So you're not giving them that chance to double check the work. So you could have a separate button here, but in the interest of showing you how this would work, I'll have the on change execute the query. So on change, and you can see this little tooltip down here. So on change, we want something to happen. So in this case, we will we'll just do, I'm thinking if we want to do this as a macro or as a code, because I'm trying to show you as much as possible. Let's do macro. I personally don't like macros that much. I find them kind of constraining. I'd rather write it out in the text editor, but it's not up to me to tell you what the best way to do is. And as you can see, we have a nice simple open query, query name. How about that? It's right there. So they're simple, but also you might not want this to be edit mode. You want to be display mode. So you could do read only. And then you save that. You can see with this selected, you have that there. So we should get the same results that we had a few seconds ago. So if we run this and we choose Sadako, and there we go, 3, 6, and 7. So just like that, you now have a form setting the criteria for a query. So about halfway there. So we've got 2 more to do. We're going to show how a query can interact with a report. Get right down to it, it's really just derivative of what we just did, because you more than likely wouldn't have the spreadsheet appear, because again, this isn't visually, this is not easy on the eye, so you might actually want this result rather than having the query open. You instead link the query to the report, and you have the report open. So in other words, rather than doing open query here, you would do run report, and the report data source would be the query. But we can think about that in a minute. So let's go ahead and click on the Create tab. We'll click on Blank Report. Similar to like when we're in the form, we're going to click on View, Design View, and even this looks kind of similar to when we're designing the form. So we're going to click on the Design tab. We're going to click on Property Sheet. Again, we have the object as a whole selected. And we're going to click on the Data tab because we need a data source. Now, as we mentioned, we could use a table, but the problem with using a table is in the real world, you're probably going to have an enormous amount of records in the table. And so while it would technically function as a data source, as a record source, the problem is it'd be unwieldy. So the only time that you'd probably actually link a table as a record source to a report would be if it's a very limited table, like maybe it's a table of incomplete records or something, and so you, the database manager, are trying to view and try to figure out what happened. So if you have a very limited focus for a table, then you could do that. Otherwise, you're probably going to use a query, because the query has already created criteria. It already has set criteria to filter out just what you want. So maybe you just want 1 day's sales, or 1 hour's sales, or 1 salesperson's sales, whatever. So we're going to click on Query 1. And now, once we do that, if we go to existing fields, this should look familiar. So just as we created a record source or a data source for the form, we did the same thing for the report. And so we once again have access to these fields. Now, since we linked it to the query doesn't have to include all the fields of the table. So if we had left out some fields, they wouldn't be here. So this isn't showing you everything in the table per se. This is showing you everything in the query. It just so happens that for the query, we included everything. So what we're going to do is we're going to make this a little bit wider because I know it won't fit horizontally. And we're just going to drag and drop these. Now there's, at the moment, 2 problems with this. It will work, of course, but from a formatting point of view, it's not great formatting, and I'll explain once I'm done, because this is just drag and drop. This is, at this point, it's rinse and repeat. We did this on the form. We grabbed the fields, and then we align them, although with the form, we have aligned them vertically with the report to keep it from being enormous. We're viewing it horizontally. Okay, so 2 things. 1, unlike the form is what you see is what you get. Here, this isn't the size of the report. That'd be unwieldy. That'd be just so tiny as to be unusable. What's going to happen is each record that gets included in the report will have this much space accompanying it. So you'd have record 1, all this space, record 2, all this space. So it might look weird to look at, but you actually want to shrink all that space that you don't want. Second thing, ideally, the labels really should be up here in the page header, because just like this blank space, these headers will be repeated with every single record. I'm going to leave it like that because I don't want to waste your time and break these and move them, because again, this tutorial is really about how the form interacts with the individual database objects and not those objects themselves. So what we can do, we can now save this. And if we go back to our form, we have to redo the coding that's the macro that's associated with this. So if we go to design, and again, in this case, we don't want the form as a whole selected. We want this control selected. Go to property sheet, and we go to event, and we click on the ellipsis to open up the macro. See how it's running the query? We don't want it to run the query. We want it to now run the form, and the form will point to the query. So we can just delete this. And then just as we did open query, we can do open report. So report 1. That's fine, nothing special about it. Close that. Close that. Make sure which X you click on there, because if I clicked on the lower X, that would have deleted the macro that I just created. And so now that should be it. We'll save the form. We'll run it. We'll make a choice, say Sadako again, and there we go. Now this is a particularly interesting moment, because what you've done now is you just made all 4 of the major database objects interact with each other, because a form was used to run a report whose data source was a query that was pulling data from a table. To make this report happen, you needed to make all 4 of the major database objects work, and you did that. The only object we haven't really included would be a standard module. Like I said, we've made some class modules, but a standard module would actually show up here. It's actually possible to have a database without any standard modules, depending on what you're doing. But really, I'd say that's beyond the scope of this particular database, because modules tend to have a highly specific meaning. They have a very highly specific purpose. So outside of whatever database you're trying to make, it's not really that helpful. I also have other tutorials about modules if you want to check those out. But yeah, this is a particularly stunning moment, because to make this happen, you needed all 4 major database objects to work together. So well done to all of you. So that leaves just one form left, and that is we're going to create a form that will open these forms. So basically you're creating a main menu, because at the very beginning, that's what we said that we were doing. We're creating a interface. So create blank form, view, design view. Again, we're going to get rid of those navigation buttons. So we go to design, property sheet. Again, we want the form as a whole to be selected. Format if it's not already there. Navigation buttons, no. Record selectors, no. We will click on a command button. We'll cancel out of that. And then what we'll do, we will click on event. On click, we'll do a macro. And we'll this time do open form. And the form name will be form 1. Save. Close. Save this. And actually, let's call this main underscore menu. I don't know if it still does. I believe older versions of Access used to have like a default dashboard that you could activate. I don't see really any point in it. You can just manually make this really quickly. And let's just make sure that this opens up form 1. So view, command, there you go, form 1 opened up. So let's go back to design view, and you can just change the caption, like add record, whatever you want to call it, new product. This is just a caption, does not affect the functionality. Now what we do is same thing. Create another button, cancel out of that. We'll call this reports, even though it's only actually one report. And then event, on click, macro, same thing, rinse and repeat, open form, form name, this time it's form 2, save, clicking on the top one here, not this one would delete the macro we just created, save it, view it, reports, and there you go. So that's about it. So the only thing left, you could spruce these up a bit. Like I said, I really didn't care about layout. I didn't want to get distracted with the kind of little bells and whistles. I really wanted to focus on the functionality. But yeah, so you could do things like up here, you could put a label that says something like, this here is a label. So don't get confused with this, which is an actual text box where you're doing data entry. This is a label, so you could just put this here and type reports. It's labels, so it really doesn't have any meaningful functionality to it. And we will just, for format, let's change that to like 18. I won't do any more because, again, that's just the little flourishes. I wanted to focus on the functionality. Okay, so I really hope that this has been helpful. This is a little bit different than my normal tutorials. I try to have most of my tutorials be introductory in nature, but this one was all about the connectivity. This one was all about creating the user interface. And then, like I said, there's a few things you can do. You can change the file type to ACCDR rather than DB, and by doing that, it will hide the tables, hides the ribbon. You can also do things like split the front end away from the tables and all the objects. So basically, splitting the database in two. Won't get into that now. But that should about do it. So again, I really hope that you found this helpful. Please leave a comment if there's something else you'd like to see. And that should about do it. And please have a good day.